snare solo. Today I just wanted to talk about the snare drum and basically the parts of the snare, how the snare works, and how to get the best sound out of your snare drum. The reason it's good to study up on your snare is because pretty much the snare is one of the most important parts of the drum kit. It's also one of the most complex drums, but it's also the drum that you can customize the sound of the most. So it's really good to get thoroughly familiar with how to tweak your different snare tones and the tuning of it, and so that basically you can get any snare sound you need whenever you want it. Okay, so your snare sound will basically depend on 4 or 5 main factors. The first thing is the kind of drum heads you're using for the batter head and the resonant head side. Another thing is the muffling. Sometimes you can use what we would call like a muffling ring, or you can make your own out of old drum heads by just cutting it out. Basically that puts a little muffling around the whole circumference of the snare drum head, and usually you get pretty good results with that. Sometimes you can also take tape and bunch the tape up and use it as a muffle too, but I'll talk about that in a different video. Yeah, another thing that affects the sound of the snare is how tight or loose the snare wires are. So that can really affect, you can almost get another tom-tom sound out of your snare drum just by turning the snares off. And probably the most important part of the snare sound is the tuning of the batter head and the tuning of the resonant heads. Using the tunings of both of those, you can really affect how fat the sound is, or how thin, or how poppy the snare sounds. So tuning your drum is probably one of the most important things to get familiar with, and it takes practice and time to get familiar with how your drum tunes, but it's definitely worth the experience so that you can get the drum sound that you really want from your kit. Okay, so taking a closer look at the snare, we have the batter head right here. This is the head which you hit, and then going around each snare drum head is a rim, or what they call a counter hoop. This is what holds each drum head to the shell and keeps the drum intact. Tightening the rim down to the shell of the drum are about 8 tension rods going around the drum. These are what you use to tune the drum using a specific drum key. Okay, and then moving on, if we look at the bottom of the snare drum, you see this is the resonant head. The resonant head is a lot thinner than the batter. It's because you need a thinner head for these snare wires to kind of vibrate against. And the snare wires are what creates the cracking sound of the snare drum. And it's also what enables you to create a really smooth snare drum roll. And if we look a little closer at the counter hoop of the resonant head, we can see that there actually is a little space on each end for the snare wires to be connected to each end of the drum. Usually you have tape, some snare tape that will be tightened down to each end, but here we have some string that's working fine. Okay, now here's one of the biggest parts of the snare. This is called the strainer. Now the strainer is what enables you to adjust how tight or loose the snare wires are. Basically this whole unit right here is just called the strainer. On it is a throw-off switch. The throw-off switch lets you just turn the snare wires straight off. And then right above it we have the snare adjustment knob, and this you can control how tight or loose the snares are when the throw-off switch is up. Okay, and then sometimes on the snare you'll actually have a few extra little parts. Right here we have what's called a muffling adjustment knob, and for this snare in particular, not all snares have this, but you have a little muffle that's inside of the drum, which you can use if you don't have anything else. Okay, I think that's about covers all the basic parts of the snare. Sometimes on different kinds of snare models you have more features, but this covers your run-of-the-mill snare drum for now. Just a quick note on the snare stand itself. Snare stands have what we call a basket and this is what you put the snare on. So the snare drum just rests. Try to get it each into the basket so it just fits in there snug. And then when you're setting up your snare drum on your drum kit, you want to take the snare strainer. You just want to set it up so that you just have an easy reach of it with your left or right hand. Usually I put it more to my left side since my left hand, which plays the snare, can get easier reach of it. But that totally depends on you and how you want to set up your drum kit. So, okay guys, well that covers the snare drum. Thanks for watching the video. Feel free to post a comment or ask a question if you have anything else. Okay, we'll see you next time.